All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to 3HTI's webinar series regarding Creo. And today we're going to look at the Creo extension for the interactive surface design extension. So you're going to see some really cool capabilities in how to create and model surfaces in Creo. And leading the charge today in the demo and the overview is Paul Dye, a solutions consultant and applications engineer from PTC. Paul always does a great job on these webinars, so glad to have him. So if anybody has any questions or need to let us know of anything, please type your questions in the chat box. We'll try to respond to them as we move along through the webinar, but we will at least answer them at the end if we don't get to them during the webinar. So thanks for being on. And with that, Paul, you can take control and take it away.
All right. And you can hear me okay? And you can see my screen?
Yeah, I can see your screen, can hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. Well, Rob, thank you so much for having me on. Always happy to go through and talk to different extensions. And this one especially, it is really great. A lot of different savings and a lot of different efficiencies you're going to get here. If you do any type of surfacing and you don't currently work with this is something that you're going to want to know about. And I can help you out to understand it a little bit better. So again, my name is Paul Dye, solutions consultant and application engineer here with PTC. And that's what I'm here to do today, is talk through a little bit about the interactive surface design extension, how it's used, going to go through and show you what it exactly looks like in the context of Creo. And if you have any questions, more than happy to get those answered. If there's anything that I can't answer today, I have a pretty extensive team that I can get through and get really anything answered that you're interested in. So with that, we can go ahead and get started. So before I go through and really talk to the capabilities and show what it looks like in the context of Creo, one of the first things I like to do is really lay the foundation for it by going over the challenges that we typically see out in the industry. And first off, surface modeling in general typically requires a pretty high degree of skill and expertise to be able to do. Normally requires you to have a pretty in-depth knowledge of how to build out complex curves, do everything that you really need to do to get to those high quality surfaces. And what we've seen is that users typically tend to struggle out in other systems to create that kind of surface geometry if you're just trying to work with your standard parametric surfacing techniques. Things like parameters, constraints that you have to lay out. A lot of times they really limit the amount of flexibility and really the creativity that you have throughout the process. See a lot of different companies try to rely on third-party applications to do that. Things like conceptual design, exploring new ideas. It's not something that's really easy for them. And that's really what we need to be able to do. We need to be able to create, we need to be able to evaluate more designs during the concept phase. Typical user, maybe they're only able to evaluate 2 or 3 different designs during that concept phase. And that's just due to the fact that it's hard to build out concept sketches, reverse engineer physical prototypes. And on top of all that, we need to be able to take into account things like styling, aesthetics. We need a clean design that's at the end of the day still going to appeal to a customer. So a lot of different things that we want to be able to take into account, and things that we really built out a solution to specifically in Creo with the interactive surface design extension. Kind of a mouthful. We typically refer to it as ISDX. And with ISDX, what you're really doing is you're combining what you have in freeform modeling and also more technical surfacing, and we're putting it into a single intuitive, easy to use environment. And what we want to do with this is really put the focus back onto things like design aesthetics and shapes, rather than having to always have to worry about constraints and parameters. And to really lay the context for this as well, there's a couple of main areas of surfacing that you're going to see within Creo. So you may have worked with what's called the freestyle tool. That's more for doing organic shapes, a little bit more freeform style surface modeling. That's kind of what you have on the one side. And on the other side, you have what you would typically work with your parametric surfacing, where it's all very constrained, all very parameter based. What this ISDX tool is really doing is it's giving you the value of both of those two things and putting it into this one easy to use environment. And so this really design environment in ISDX, it's been designed to maximize the efficiency that you're working with, maximize the productivity that you have throughout that whole surfacing process. Very intuitive UI. What you're going to see and really notice at the demos, you have a lot of different tools like a 4-window display to help you build out features from multiple different angles, because that's a lot of times what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to, when you're working with complex geometry, see things from the X direction, the Y direction, the Z direction, be able to manage that all at the same time, make changes in multiple perspectives, and directly edit any of that geometry. And in most cases, it'll start by creating freeform curves. ISDX makes curve creation very straightforward. We have a lot of enhanced capabilities for doing things like isoline curves, curve on surface, curve from surface, projection onto surface, any type of curve that you're going to think of, really. So a lot of different ways for getting those built out. And at the same time, also analyzing the curves that you're working with. You need to make sure that they're tangent, curvature, acceleration, continuous. When you're building out high quality surfaces, the quality of the curves that you're working with are going to be just as important. So we have a lot of control in that aspect. And from that point, we made the creation and editing of then the surfaces, both very flexible, very interactive, boundary, loft, blend surfaces, smart curve, and surface making those connections, making sure that everything that we build out is going to transition how we need it to. And lastly here, before we get into the demo, one of the big things that we want users to be able to do is create this sort of free-form geometry at any point throughout the design process. And one of the reasons we're able to do that is because it's all tied in with our standard Creo parametric features. It means that any change that we make to the surfaces, any change that we make to any of the input parameters, they're going to update real time any of the design or analysis features that we built, and vice versa. Say you have a parametric feature that changes that was used to define your surfaces, everything can be fully associative. You can have all that update real time. And you're able to work from multiple different areas. You can either work starting from a 2D sketch, you can work with 3D imported geometry. A lot of times we see users working in the concept design phase. They start with a couple different sketches. So you're able to bring those in and use that for the base of the design. But you could also at the same time work directly from a 3D point cloud or facet geometry. So it makes it easier also to reverse engineer curves and surfaces that may have been created outside of Creo. And really the main question that we get when working with this is who specifically is ISDX, or the Interactive Surface Design Extension, designed for? Well, to start, the first big group is your concept and industrial engineers, really anyone that's working in the early stage design, laying out the foundation for a model, but really it's for anyone working in Creo. You have your everyday engineer designer, maybe they need a clean cosmetic shape on the outside of the model. Well, use ISDX on top of whatever normal parametric tools that you're used to working with. All right, with that, we can go ahead and jump into a demonstration. Rob, if there's any questions right now, I'm free to take that and answer it. But if not, we can again make sure that we get that by the end of the call. So just wanted to take a quick stop and make sure that we're good before moving on.
All clear at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah, and this will make a little bit more sense now, I think, as we start to actually show what these things look like here in the context of Creo. So for the demonstration, I'm going to be using a data set that we actually have from one of our customers, Royal Enfield. Specifically, we're going to be working up here on the handguard assembly. And right now we have the main metal bar that's going to provide the structure for that handguard. And what we need to do here is design a plastic covering that's going to go around that bar. Might be something that we sketched up initially, one of our industrial designers built out. And what I want to do now is bring in a 2D concept sketch and work with it right here in my 3D design environment. And again, this is going to be more of a typical workflow that you'll see with designers working from the concept phase. They'll take in those initial sketches, use them as the foundation for creating all the different 3D features that you're going to see here in Creo. And that's looking pretty good, aligned well with some of our harder geometry. Go ahead and bring in another sketch. So we can really use this as the framework from working either from the front, from the side view, from the top down. And with any of these sketches, like you can see, you're able to rotate them, scale them up, change the size, like you see here, change the transparency, change the color of the image, just to align it well with that hard geometry that you're starting with here. All right, and once we have those images in, we're ready to go ahead and create some surfaces. So right now what I do have as well is a curve down here in the front that's going to give us a little bit of an idea of where that main metal bar is. So even if we hide it, we're still able to tie in our new surfaces back in with that geometry. All right, and if we want to work here with the Interactive Surface Design Extension, we're going to go up, like you see up here in the surfaces, and select this style tool. And with that, we'll go ahead and start to build out some curves on the model. And curves are really the foundation for any of the surfaces that you're going to be building out in this style tool. And as you can see here, very easy to go through, build that out here on the model. And we can take that, build it out pretty simply, define it better as we go along. And at any point, you can go through do curvature analysis. You can see how smooth the curves that you build are, especially at any points where you might have transitions between curves. You can really start to smooth those out. And we can go ahead back into this curve here. Maybe I need to align it better with those sketches I had from before. What I can actually do is work in this multi-view approach. This allows us to see every change that I'm making from multiple different orientations at once. You can change the size of each of those views and really focus in on the one that you're currently designing with, but still get context from those other views as well while you're going through and making changes. And that's really important when you're working in the 3D space, is as I'm going through moving the curve in one direction, well, what is that doing in the Y direction? What's that doing in the Z? This makes it a lot easier to see that throughout the process. And you can go through here on each of these different views, really make sure that the curve is going to be aligning well with any of those 2D sketches that we started with. All right, and we can add in any points if we need to, but right now I'm going to go ahead and do the same sort of thing down here on the bottom. And what you'll notice is that I can really lay these curves out as precisely or as loosely as I'd like to, but we're able to go through and define the level of detail that you want as you move along. Even do some curvature analysis at any point, or again, at any point, you can switch back into this multi-view to really get better context into all the different changes that we're making. And you can see here, while we're in the edit curve, you can go back in and add more points in very quickly. You can move those points around. You can always look at the curvature plot to make sure that each change that you're making is actually doing what you want it to. You don't have any not intended changes. And if you don't like what's happening, you can always go back into any of those views, make whatever changes that you need to. But with this, you're much, much less likely to have any issues pop up unexpectedly later on. All right, now we can go ahead and activate the right plane here. And we're going to create the first planar curve using a couple different reference points that we have on these curves that we've created. So we're going to start by selecting the curve that we have up at the top, move down to the middle there, and then finish up down at the bottom curve. And once we have those good to go, we can place a few more along here, but maybe this time we want to use the radial planar option. Tons of different options that we have available. What this one means is that I'm going to select on a point on one of these curves, and then the plane that's created is going to be normal to the profile sketch that we selected. And you can see as you move it along, it's going to stay normal along that curve. We'll do the same sort of thing with the third curve here, again, using the radial planar option. We'll put that over here on the right-hand side of the model. And that's looking pretty good. And with any of these curves laid out properly, we can go ahead now and create our first surface. So we'll do that first by selecting on some of those different curves on the outside, right along the boundary. And then we can select on also some of these controlling curves that we have in the middle there as well. And just like that, we're done with the first surface. And we're good to move on to the top section of our model, where maybe we want to add in a little bit more control with this, right? So the first thing we need to do is add in two 3D free curves here along some of our existing curves. It's just going to make sure that the surfaces that we're adding in here at the top are going to transition well into the surfaces that we already built out. So with these surfaces, we'll simply select the 4 bounding curves along the outside of the region that we want to place that curve. And we can do the same thing over here on the right-hand side of the model. All right, so now the surfaces are good to go. We can go ahead and focus in here on the middle section. And it's going to be fairly similar to the very first surface that we created. First thing I'm going to do here is add in a controlling curve along the middle of that region where we want to place the surface. Now, the main difference with this is I want to be able to control the tangency here at the endpoints. You can see whenever I select on this, you have a lot of different options from tangent, G1, G2, G3, acceleration, curvature, continuous, and you have all these different options at any of the different endpoints. And you get to take it further if you'd like to, but we're happy with just making it tangent for now. And we can also check back in on the multi-view, see that we need to move the curve a little bit up forward just to properly align with the sketch that we had. We can also go through and add in a couple points just to give us a little bit more control over that curve. Also use the bottom view down here just to make sure everything's positioned correctly. And now I think that curve's looking pretty good. So we can go ahead and move forward from here. We can create these middle surfaces as well. So let's get this smaller half here by using the bounding curves again that went along that outside. Here we go. Make sure everything's aligned well. And now with this larger section, I actually want it to be indented a little bit. So let's go ahead and add in one last controlling curve that goes through here. And again, same thing here. Whenever we work with this, we can change it up. We also want to make sure that it's going to be tangent to the surface that we just created. And we can pull that in a little bit, however we want to have it set up. All right, and with that, we're good to go. And we can go ahead and create our last surface here up at the top. And while we're defining that, we can define the transition into any of those other surfaces at any point. Also add in that controlling curve that we have in the middle here. And we're all good to go up at the top. That's all completed. And what we need to do now is go ahead down to the bottom here and repeat that process that we went through and did up at the top. So we'll add in the first curve along here at the bottom. Do the same thing over here on the right-hand side. And with any of these curves that you're working with, you can go through now and maybe place some of the surfaces on the other side. And what we're doing here is creating four-sided surfaces, but you could do more than just four sides if you wanted to. You could just as easily build out lofted surfaces, swept surfaces, a lot of different options that you have at your disposal at any point wherever you're working. It's really whatever gives you the best way of getting to the end goal that you're looking to get to. And now what we're going to do is come down here and finish up this center section. And again, the quick menuing that you'll see while I'm working with this is very smart for making it very quick to define the tangency, the curvature. It's meant to be very fast. And that's really one of the main points that you'll see throughout the different tools here in ISDX, whether it be the multi-section window, the quick menuing. Again, we made this tool with ISDX. We really wanted to build some fairly complex geometry, but we want to do it in a way that takes less mouse clicks, less hassle to build things out, but at the same time, still have a lot of control throughout the process. And looking here, just making sure that our center curve is lining well with that initial curve or that initial sketch that we started with. And I think that's looking pretty good. So we can go ahead now and start to fill in that first area down at the bottom with the new surface. We'll do that pretty similar to how we did with the other two surfaces, just by selecting on the four curves that go along the outside here. Still making sure that tangency is in the correct direction. And the last thing we'll do here is fill in this top section here. And again, we want to have that indented a little bit like we did up at the top. Go ahead and build that out. Make sure that the curve is tangent wherever it connects back in with the bottom surface. And we can also put in another point just to pull that in a little bit. Looks good. Now with that defined, we can go ahead and grab the four curves that go along the outside edge here and make our last surface. And make sure the tangency is good with each of those. Add in that controlling curve down there in the middle as well. Make sure these are all good. Grab that middle curve and we're good to go. All right, so now we have most of our surfaces all built out. What we can do throughout this as well is do some reflection analysis to see how well things transition. And you can see it kind of looks like these zebra stripes that you'll see. It allows us to see the reflective properties of the surfaces, gain some insight on the actual quality of the surfaces you're building out, and also see if there's any issues with the surfaces. In my case, I think it's pretty good. And now that I have the base for my design, we no longer need to have those images we started with. So we can go ahead and go back into our view here and hide those images for both the front view and also the top view. All right, and right now, the surfaces that we built out are all separate surfaces within that one style feature. So what we want to do now is merge these different surfaces together into what we call quilts. If you haven't worked around quilts, it's essentially just a grouping of one or more different surfaces. And once we have all these together, we can see that we have a little bit of extra material that overlaps some of the hard geometry that we had in the model. So what I'm going to do here is do an extruded cut to remove any of those areas. And with that done, we essentially have everything laid out where we want it. We can go ahead now and start to round off some of those harder transitions. So we'll go ahead and do that here on the edge. That looks pretty good. All right, now what we want to do is remove the area where the hand guard is going to attach back in to that metal support bar. In my case, I have a surface laid out that defines that slot where it needs to be located. So we'll go ahead and use our merge tool to essentially just subtract out that slot area with the new surface. Also an area over here on the side where our cover is going to attach back in with the rest of the assembly. So we'll go ahead and remove the material from that section as well. And once that's done, we can go ahead now and use some rounds to smooth out some of the harder edges that we have between our surfaces. if you've worked with this, the rounding functionality in Creo is very robust. You could do here, in this case, a quartile round on the outside edge of that front surface. And maybe on this inner edge, we'll just simply do a constant radius for that round. All right, now that everything's laid out, we can go ahead and take the surface and give a thickness to it, which is in turn going to take this and turn it into a solid model. Maybe 1.5 looks good. And there we go. Now we have our model that we could take forward, work around. And what's really powerful at this point is the full associativity that you have for the surfaces to the rest of the parametric features. What that means is that if you have any of this hard geometry that we use to define the surface change, maybe in this case, the inner radius of the curve needs to be decreased a little bit. You can go ahead and change that. And you can see with that, everything automatically updates. The surfaces update, all your features update, everything that we create in ISDX is seamlessly able to be connected in with anything else that you do in Creo going forward. All right, so that's the interactive surface design extension. Really built out to take that surface geometry, build it out very quickly, and we have full control over this entire process, like you see there.
And your hands are protected while riding your motorcycle.
Yes, a very, very underrated thing, but things can be moving through the air, and you really want to make sure those hand guards are built out pretty well. So
true.
All right, and before we wrap up again, I just want to take a minute to go over some of the really value that we have throughout this, because this is an extremely valuable extension that you're going to work with. A lot of what we see out in the industry is people working with reduced time to market. And that's really from just the increased productivity and the efficiency at which you're working with inside of ISDX. It's less time that you're wasting trying to recreate concept geometry, and we just want to move right into that detailed portion of the design. You're designed to realize price premium. You're not only doing precise manufacturable geometry, it's going to be all high quality, all very aesthetically pleasing products that are going to be pretty easy to differentiate out in the market, reduce product development costs, less reliance on physical prototypes. And at the end of the day, we're going through and iterating more. You're spending less time just trying to get things to work, less time working with constraints, and more time actually being creative, trying out different designs and working from that point. And at the end of the day, still getting to the best model possible. Okay, and now at this point, I can go ahead and take any questions that we might have or anything that maybe I could expand a little bit upon. And I can just give it a little bit of a here just in case anyone has any follow-up. We'll give it just a second for any questions to roll in.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Paul. I was talking. I didn't realize I was on mute.
No, that's no problem.
The one question that came in was basically saying that there's great capabilities in ISDX, but for a for an individual Creo user, it could be a little challenging as far as the pricing, since it's based on an annual subscription. And the only thing that I could recommend, because PTC is only offering all their software on a subscription basis, is when there is a special, a promotion. And there's a promotion that just ended where there was a 35% discount off of all Creo extensions. I would highly recommend taking advantage of those opportunities, those offers, because they renew year after year. So it's not just 35% off for the first year, but it's also 35% off ongoing. And that's just how the pricing model for PTC is. So we send emails out in a newsletter of what promotions are, what PTC promotions are on a quarterly basis. We should be getting a new batch of promotions on the 7th of April. So we'll be communicating those very soon. So with that, Paul, if there's nothing else, I guess what we'll do is we'll just be dismissed. We'll upload the recording into our YouTube page and send the link to everybody so that they can watch this at their leisure in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Really happy to go through and explain this. And again, even just out of the box with Creo, even with just your standard base parametric subscription, you still get access to the freestyle modeling for doing more of that organic geometry. You still do have your standard type of parametric surface modeling. And this is really, again, geared towards users that want to then take that to the next level. If you do a lot of surfacing, or you really are starting to have this as part of your everyday workflow, it's something to go through and do a bit of a return on investment thought around. How much time do you waste trying to build things out with not the best tool, right? So understand that it might be out of reach for some individuals, but definitely something that you can save a lot of time and ultimately a lot of money by utilizing.
All right. So with that, I want to thank everybody for being on this afternoon. I want to thank you, Paul, for a great presentation and a great explanation. And if you have any questions or think of anything after the webinar, you could just respond to the email that was sent. The invitations that were sent, they come directly to me. So if they have any questions or need any other information, just send me an email, info@3HTI, or just respond to the emails that were sent, and we'll help you out. So thanks again, Paul. Jeff, thank you for being on our panel today, and most importantly, thank you for all of our attendees today. Have a great day, and we will see you next week. Take care.